and other community events to stay accessible. And with that, Ian, I would love to turn it over to people's questions. Thank you so much.
Sure thing. Thank you, Representative Wild. Appreciate you being with us tonight. Thanks to all of you in the 7th Congressional District for being with us as well. A reminder, if you'd like to get email updates from the Congresswoman's office, press 7 on your phone here. Get that email address to one of our operators. We'll get you added to the e-newsletter. And let's go right into Q&A here. We've got John in Bethlehem Township up first. John, thanks for being on the call. What's your question for us?
Hi, thanks for the opportunity to address the Congresswoman, and thanks for having this town hall. I have a twofold question, and the first one are your thoughts on the harassment of Senators Sinema and Manchin, and will you take a public position to condemn that?
Go ahead. Was there a follow-up to that, John?
Yeah, and the follow-up regards that same bill that they're getting just harangued for, that the public discourse has gotten off the rails and people need to stand up for this. But do you honestly believe that your constituents are going to swallow that this bill represents zero cost?
So I'll take the first part of that question first, and that is that I think it is the obligation of every elected official to be as transparent and accountable as possible. I do believe, I quite frankly think that Senator Manchin it has been quite vocal and has put himself out there and spoken to the television cameras and to folks who want to know where he is, whether they agree with him or they don't. I think he's at least been out there. I've been a little bit concerned about the fact that Senator Sinema has been more reclusive. I'm not quite sure what harassment you're speaking of. We all, as elected officials, have an obligation to respond to questions, inquiries, the press, and so forth. The only instance I saw of harassment that you may be referring to was where she was followed into a public restroom, and I thought that was reprehensible and that should never happen. Everybody has the right, and whether they're elected or not, to use the facilities privately, and I would hope that would not be repeated. And by the way, let me just say, as an elected official myself, it's sometimes easy to fall into this thinking that we are being harassed. Every elected official has experienced an onslaught of phone calls, emails, public appearance, commentary, and so forth about different issues and different positions that we take. And, I respect you for saying that my sense of your question is that we shouldn't be harassed. I think that we absolutely owe the public answers and transparency and accountability, as I said before. But I do think that I would appreciate and respect that everybody recognize that we too are humans, and some of the conduct that we see surrounding those questions can be very hurtful. On your second question about the cost of the Build Back Better Act. So I want to say a few things about this. I think you're referencing the fact that the president has said on numerous occasions that it's not going to cost one nickel. I actually had a Zoom meeting with the president this morning, along with just a handful of other people in districts very similar to ours. And I said specifically, John, to the president, that it's not enough to just get out there and say this bill isn't going to cost anything, because when you say that and you don't follow up with any details, frankly, it's hard for people to believe that, because there's an awful lot in this bill and you need to explain that. He promised me that he would do a better job of doing that, and we'll see if that happens. But let me just say that I believe that there are a number of things in the Build Back Better Act that are not being highlighted, that need to be highlighted. What we in Congress, we have this kind of goofy technical term called pay-fors. How do you pay for the bill? What are the pay-fors in it? One of the things that I am particularly passionate about is Medicare negotiation of prescription drug prices, which actually would go a very long way to paying for the priorities in the rest of the bill. So I don't, I'm waiting to hear how we make all of this happen at no cost or no outlay. But I do know that there are a number of mechanisms specifically set forth in the bill, aside from Medicare negotiation of drug prices, that will provide for payment of the programs that are being included in that bill. And I also think that it's really, really important for people to understand that we're not talking about whatever number this comes in at, and it's not going to be a $3.5 trillion bill. I'll tell you that right now. You can take that to the bank. That's not going to be the number, but that we are talking about the cost of a bill over 10 years. We're not talking about this year. And as I said, there are a number of programs included within it to offset that cost.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I appreciate the answers. And John, thank you so much for being a part of our forum. Thank you for your questions. And let's get to our next question. Looks like we've got George, Catherine, Sam in line, and thanks to everybody who's submitting all these questions. We're going to get to as many as we can. George in Allentown, you're up next. Go ahead, sir.
Good evening. My question is this. We faced a worldwide pandemic, a very bad situation that came out of, a laboratory, so we understand. Meanwhile, Congress and the president, Congress was really bickering to impeach the president. That was their top priority. What can we do to ensure that this situation will never happen again in the future, and that Congress and the president will have a plan set in case something like this would happen? We had hospitals that were begging for supplies. They weren't getting them. Just basically, what can be done in the future to ensure that this would be top priority and nothing else would take its toll? This is my first time calling in. I'm kind of nervous, so I hope it came out the right way.
No, I got the question. I got the question.
So that's it. I'm sorry.
It's a really good question. This is not going to be the last pandemic of our lifetime, much as I would like to think that it would be. And I have actually been speaking a lot with our local healthcare networks and some industries that we have here in Pennsylvania 7 that have been really on the front lines of this pandemic. And one of the things that has been reinforced for me over and over again is that we need some sort of pandemic preparedness plan. And we've got to make sure that that is in place. There are a lot of us in Congress working on this as we move forward. Listen, I would love to think that we're going to get through the rest of our lives without another pandemic. This has been grueling and incredibly difficult for so many people to go through, not to mention the 700,000 lives that have been lost. But we have to make sure that we are ready for this. I think that you mentioned the origination of this pandemic. We've got to make sure that we are keeping a close eye on global health measures. We've got to make sure that we are keeping a close eye on travel restrictions when pandemics or some sort of concern about a disease that may be spreading is coming into place. One of the things that causes me a great deal of concern is that at the very, very beginning of COVID-19, we didn't institute travel restrictions quickly enough. And quite honestly, it spread in this country much more quickly than we would have liked to see. But aside from that, we really need to make sure that we are prepared. We can never again have a situation where our healthcare providers are literally begging for PPE, that personal protective equipment. Remember, that was like the PPE was the buzzword a year and a half or almost 2 years ago now. We can't ever be in that situation again where we've got doctors and nurses who are, receiving masks that are so old that the band around the back of your head is snapping and that kind of thing. We've always got to be in a state of readiness. And the other thing is, it comes back to we absolutely need to be working on a made in America economy. One of the problems that we had at the beginning of this pandemic is we had governors, including our own, flying to China to pick up PPE because we didn't have enough of it made here in the United States. That puts us at the mercy of the rest of the world. So I will tell you, I have long been very, very committed to this Made in America economy that is being spoken of. I am working very hard on trade issues, supply chain issues, and that kind of thing to make sure that we have resources we need right here in the United States the next time, God forbid, that this happens.
Thank you again, Congresswoman. Appreciate that answer. And thank you to George for being a part of our forum. We're going to go right to Catherine next. I will mention here we had a big wait of folks who were giving us their email address for email updates. There's just 3 of you in line now, so hang tight. We'll get an operator with you shortly. And if you would like to get your email address to us for updates, press 7 on your phone. Catherine in West Park, go ahead.
Hi, Representative Wild. My question has to do with a few months ago, Senator Casey was in Allentown, downtown in front of the courthouse, and he was talking up the Build Back Better legislation and especially the amount of money to increase the poverty wages of people that are carers for people who are disabled and have different issues in their lives and need someone so they can stay independent. And I had a chance to talk to him, and I asked him about the filibuster, and didn't he think that we had to end the filibuster in order to get both the physical infrastructure and also the Build Back Better human infrastructure passed? And his answer then was that I shouldn't worry, that he thought that it would get done without lifting the filibuster. And I wonder what you think now, several months later, about that answer and what your answer would be.
Well, as you know, the filibuster is unique to the Senate, and I'm not in the Senate. I do have views on the filibuster. I've been very, very frustrated as a member of Congress that we have gotten a number of good bills passed that we haven't even spoken about yet tonight that seem to go nowhere in the Senate, much of which is because of the filibuster. My problem with the filibuster is that it puts way too much power in the hands of 1 or 2 people who may very well not even represent a large population of the United States. I'm not an expert on the filibuster rules or the Senate operational rules. But I will tell you, as a member of the House of Representatives, that I find the filibuster to be incredibly frustrating, and that I think that it's probably outlived its usefulness, and that we need to go back to a majority type of vote that would allow members or senators from multiple states to have their opinions matter and their votes matter.
Thank you again, Representative. Thank you, Catherine. Appreciate you being a part of our forum today. Let's keep trucking through these questions. A lot of great ones. Thank you again to PA7 here for all these excellent questions. Sam in Lower Nazareth, go ahead, please.
Hi, Congresswoman. Thank you for this opportunity. My wife and I have 2 questions for tonight. The first is we're wondering where we stand with the talk of an added railroad line to this area. And the second question was around unsolicited phone calls and now texts. They seem to be increasing in number, and we were just wondering when it's time to step up regulation to control this. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sam, in Lower Naz. The railroad line is something that I'm almost afraid to hope for, because it's been so long in coming, and I'm not here to guarantee that it's going to happen, but I feel more optimistic about it than I have ever felt in the many, many years that I have lived in the Lehigh Valley. I think there is a real commitment by both the President and the Department of Transportation to get this done. I also think that rail would affect many, many other issues, including, of course, the climate change issues that matter to so many people. But it would also directly affect the people of Pennsylvania 7. Here we are at this amazing crossroads, very close to New York City, very close to Philadelphia, very close to Harrisburg and other points, and yet getting to any one of those places is an exercise in frustration. I say this as somebody who drives back and forth to and from D.C. almost weekly. It's just not an easy drive, even though it's 180 miles. But it's taxing and exhausting. And quite honestly, if I could sit on a train and read materials, I would really, really welcome it. So I think we're as close to it as we've ever been. I'm going to let me just say, Sam, I'll call it, I'm cautiously optimistic. How's that? I don't want to make promises that I can't keep. Secondly, on the unsolicited phone calls and texts, it's remarkable how many people I hear about that from. I recently asked my legislative director to take a look at that and see where we are in terms of legislation. I voted for the Bipartisan Traced Act. It is called that's an acronym for telephone robocall abuse, criminal enforcement, and deterrence. Now you know why we use acronyms, which President Trump signed into law to modernize our federal tools to identify, block, and investigate illegal robocalls. Robocalls can be an annoyance to all of us. My biggest concern is that robocall fraudsters target seniors with Medicare and Social Security scams. Also during these times of COVID, when we have had federal stimulus payments and that kind of thing, we've seen a real uptick in fraudulent calls suggesting to people that if they, turn over their Social Security number, they'll get another stimulus check or something like that. I just want to caution everybody. I think you all know this, but please don't ever share personal information. Please know that the IRS is never going to call you on the phone. Period. They don't. They reach out to you by letter. So please do not respond to IRS phone calls. Those are total scams. And please consult the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, if they suspect foul play. So I hope that helps. Something that many of us are very, very focused on. And a lot of it is because of the harassment factor, but also because there is a real concern when it comes to senior citizens. I lost my mother in 2014, and when my sister and I started to go through her accounts and that kind of thing, we were just stunned by the number of organizations that she was just sending monthly payments to that we couldn't discern any kind of personal connection to. So that really, it concerns me.
Yeah, thank you, Congresswoman. And thank you, Sam and your wife. Appreciate both of those questions. Let's move right along to Sam and Helchin now. Susan, you're live on the line. Go ahead, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm confused on if there's a bill out there to lower the Medicare eligibility age. I understand that Ms. Jayapal has introduced this legislation, and is this part of the Build Back Better bill?
So, Susan, I like your first name, by the way. So I'm very familiar with what you're talking about. I am very familiar with Representative Jayapal's efforts to reduce the Medicare eligibility age, and for everybody else's benefit, there's movement by her to reduce the age to qualify for Medicare to either age 60 or 62. I'm going to be very, very frank with you. Although that has been discussed at length, there have been considerable efforts made to put it into the Build Back Better Act. I do not expect to see it as part of the final product. I'm not saying for sure that, but I'm just trying to be really transparent with you so that people don't have their hopes up unnecessarily. There are a couple of reasons for that. One is that it would be a huge cost. And cost, is always a consideration. As my dad always told me, money doesn't grow on trees. And secondly, there's a real concern right now with workforce development and having enough workers in the marketplace. And there's a serious concern that lowering the Medicare eligibility age could potentially take workers out of the workforce at a time when we most need them. Having said that, I have heard from a number of constituents that they would really like to see the Medicare eligibility age lowered. This seems to be particularly of concern where there's an age disparity between husband and wife, where the husband who perhaps is carrying the medical benefits has to continue to work even past his Medicare eligibility age because his wife continues to need health care benefits because she's not yet at Medicare age. So it's a real concern. It's an issue, but I do not anticipate it's going to make it into the Build Back Better Act. I'm sorry if I disappointed you with that answer, Susan, but I'm just trying to be real with you.
We appreciate it. Thank you, Representative. And thank you, Susan. Let's get right to our next one from Christy. Hey, Christy in Bethlehem Township, you're up. Oh, it looks like Christy wants me to read it. Sorry about that, Christy. I'll go ahead and do that for you. She says, regarding prescriptions, she has stage 4 cancer. Will there be help for cancer patients for out-of-pocket cost? Her medication for Ibrance is $18,000 and Xgeva injections are $18,500. Why aren't cancer patients being helped like diabetic patients? That one's from Christy, Congresswoman.
Well, thank you to Christy for that question. Right now, honestly, Christy, diabetics aren't particularly being helped either. The overall cost of prescription drugs is way too high. It is the number one issue that I hear about in our district. I hear about it from people with diabetes. I hear about it from people with asthma. I hear about it from people with cancer. So believe me, I am incredibly sympathetic and empathetic to the problem that you describe. And, you know, it really, really worries me that so many people cannot afford to take the prescription drugs that their doctors order. So many people have told me they've stopped going to see their doctor because they know that he or she is going to ask why they're not taking their medication, and the answer is they can't afford them. Or in some cases, people are rationing their medications, which of course is not how they were prescribed. So the Medicare negotiation aspect of prescription drug prices, by the way, would apply not only to people who are on Medicare. I know that it sounds like that, but once Medicare, which is the single largest consumer of prescription drugs in the world, and especially in this country, it is able to negotiate the prices of specific drugs, it brings down the overall cost for everybody, including those who have employer-sponsored health plans or ACA plans. So the current, it has not been completely fleshed out yet. I don't know the exact details of what will be in the Build Back Better Act. I believe what we are going to see is that the pricing for prescription drugs will be brought down and that there will be a specific emphasis on high-cost, life-saving medications like chemo that you speak of, like insulin for diabetes, like the inhalers for asthma and that kind of thing, and that they will be separately categorized as having to be negotiated at the lowest possible price. That's what I am being given to understand, what I am fighting for, and what I think is just incredibly important to have happen. And it breaks my heart that anybody should have to pay the kind of money that you're talking about. If you have stage 4 cancer, you and your family should be concerned mostly with making sure that you are taking care of your health and doing everything you possibly can to live the best possible life you can without worrying about the cost of your medications. And so just know that that is something that I am personally very highly committed to fighting for. Thank you, Christy.
Appreciate you, Christy. Thanks so much. And folks, we are at about the halfway mark. We're 30 minutes into our 1-hour forum. We've got lots of great questions we'll continue to take, but a quick reminder of where you need to go if you need constituent assistance. That district office phone number is going to be 484-781-6000. Again, district office phone if you need constituent assistance, 484-781-6000. You can also go to wild.house.gov. And at the end of our forum, if you don't get your question answered, you can leave a voicemail message for the Congresswoman's staff with some contact info to get a call back. So we'll do our best to answer everybody. If we don't get to your question, you'll have plenty of other options, including leaving that voicemail at the end of the forum. And Congresswoman, we've got Mary Ann up next, who's asked me to read this. She says, what's being done about the opioid crisis? I lost my son to it 6 months ago. I would like to know what's being done to address this issue. Thank you, Mary Ann.
Marianne, first, let me just say that my heart goes out to you. I'm the mother of two kids. They're not really kids anymore. They're in their late 20s, but losing a child is something that no parent should ever have to experience, let alone to the opioid crisis. I have been a member of a task force to address the opioid crisis since I first came to Congress. Back then, it was called the Freshman Working Group on the Opioid Crisis. It was a bipartisan group, Democrats and Republicans. Those of us who founded it are no longer freshmen, so we took the freshmen out of it. But there is a very vigorous opioid task force that is in Congress that we are addressing these issues, and a lot of it has to do with addressing the root cause of the opioid crisis. As many of you know, it dates back a very long time to when prescription drugs, quite honestly, particularly prescription pain relief, were more freely dispensed. Thankfully, I think we've come a long way over the last few years in the medical profession changing their practices in that regard. But we are still losing, far too many people to the opioid crisis. And it is something that we are working on a very, very consistent basis, including increasing penalties internationally. I just presided over the House floor earlier this week on a bill that had to do with increasing penalties around the world for criminals who are bringing fentanyl and other opioids into the United States. And it's just something that we are going to continue to work on until we actually, and this is a problem, by the way, there are a lot of problems that can't be fully solved. This is one that I believe we can solve. We've got to get to the point where we are not losing anybody to the opioid crisis. And I remain committed to making sure that happens and working on a bipartisan basis. And the good news is, by the way, you know, there's not enough conversation about what we do on a bipartisan basis. And from everything you hear on cable news, you'd think that all we do is stand around and, you know, throw spitballs at each other or something. But the fact of the matter is that the opioid crisis has tremendous bipartisan support to make sure that we are getting something done. And so we're working on it. We're working on changes to medication dispensing laws. We are working on changes to the resources that we provide to opioid treatment centers. We are very much trying to include the treatment of opioid addiction within the mental health world, which is a cause that I am particularly committed to. So, Marianne, please accept my condolences and rest assured that my goal is to make sure that never happens again.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Let's go to Scott next. Hey, Scott, thank you for waiting. You're live on the line. Go ahead.
Yes, well, Congresswoman, I'm calling in concerned about with the national debt. When President Obama ran in 2008, he had given a speech saying that President Bush was both unpatriotic and immoral for running the debt up $4 trillion in 8 years. We're now adding $4 trillion in 1 year. And it doesn't seem like there's any stop anywhere to any of it. And being a father of children and grandchildren, I really feel with the effect that it's going to have on interest rates if they go up, that it's a crisis that no one in Washington is dealing with.
Well, Scott, thank you for that question. I grew up in a pretty frugal household. My dad was a child of the Depression, and you can imagine the way we grew up, and he's no longer with us, but believe me, the national debt is something that he railed about on a regular basis. I just want to address something that you've been hearing a lot about in the news. You've been hearing about Democrats voting to raise the debt ceiling. I want to make it really, really clear if this hasn't been made. This is not raising the debt ceiling so we can spend more money. This is raising the debt ceiling to account for money or for debt that has already been incurred over the last several years. It's kind of a weird phrase. When you talk about raising the debt ceiling, it's kind of like you're saying you're going to raise the credit limit on your credit card so you can spend more. That is not what raising the debt ceiling means. It means nothing more than increasing it to the amount of debt that has already been incurred. It's important to do that because, quite honestly, if we don't, the U.S. will default on its debts and will throw the world economy, including our own economy, into a terrible tailspin. Everybody's retirement accounts, pension funds, everything else would go into just a complete crisis. So, and by the way, Democrats and Republicans have routinely raised the debt limit to coincide with what the current level of debt is. Having said that, I think the current situation where you've got members of Congress voting on whether to raise it or not, and this, it all becomes terribly politicized, is kind of ridiculous. And I just recently signed on, and it literally is brand new, that there is a bill out there that would provide the Treasury Secretary with the ability to adjust the debt ceiling as necessary, but that it could be vetoed or canceled, that effort to raise it by Congress, but it wouldn't be a congressional decision every year to whether to raise that debt ceiling or not. And quite honestly, I have to say this, we have a situation in this country where our revenue needs to be increased. And the best way to increase revenue is to make sure that billionaires and large corporations are paying their fair share. We can pay down that debt. There have been a number of actions taken over the last 4 to 5 years that have decreased revenue by allowing people who have more than enough money to pay their fair share of taxes to not do so. So we're in a time when firefighters are paying a higher effective rate of taxes than Jeff Bezos of Amazon is. And that, to me, is unconscionable, and we've got to make sure that comes to an end.
Thank you again. Appreciate the question. Thank you again for the answer, Congresswoman. We've got Eric, who's in Lehigh County next, and asking me to read this question, asking what kinds of things can we look for in the new infrastructure bill in terms of restaurants specifically? And that's Eric in Lehigh.
Eric, thanks for that question. I am a huge fan of the restaurant industry and specifically the restaurants here in Pennsylvania 7. You may or may not be aware that last year I was one of the leads on something called the Restaurants Act when they were just struggling so much with COVID, with all the shutdowns, with the closing of their restaurants. And unfortunately, the PPP and all the things that were designed to help small businesses really were not tailored to restaurants. And so I led that. It took a while, but we finally got, through the American Rescue Plan, got some tremendous help to our restaurants. I have spoken directly with a number of restaurant owners here in the Lehigh Valley about the fact that that American Rescue Plan was literally their lifeline, that they were on the verge of shutting down, and that they didn't have to do so because of the funding that was finally provided through the American Rescue Plan. I don't believe, but I can't state to a certainty, Eric, that there is restaurant relief in the upcoming Build Back Better Act. Although if you will leave us your contact information, we will make sure we get back to you on that and let you know. The Build Back Better Act is really more of a series of what I consider to be groundbreaking programs to address issues that haven't been dealt with in this country ever, or at least not adequately. Specifically, the issue of childcare and early childhood education. We want to make sure. One of the problems I'm hearing from the restaurants is that not enough people are coming back to work. And it's a huge issue for them because all of a sudden, COVID, not that COVID is over, but we've all learned how to improvise. We've learned how to go out and try to be safe in public places. A lot of people have been vaccinated. Restaurants are seeing a resurgence, but if they don't have enough workers, They can't open on a full-time schedule, which is incredibly frustrating to them. They actually have the demand and not the supply. And so one of the things that we need to work on the most is workforce development. How are we going to get all of these people back to work? I firmly believe that a big part of that is going to be done through the Build Back Better Act, which includes substantial provisions for childcare and early childhood education, which would free up a lot of parents to be able to get back into the workplace. By the way, there was a lot of criticism not too long ago about the supplemental unemployment insurance that was being paid out, and a lot of people, and particularly I heard from restaurants, that they felt that it was a disincentive for people to go back to work, that they had employees who were saying, I'm not going to come back to work because, I can stay home with my children and collect unemployment. For everybody's reference, that supplemental unemployment ended on September 6th. So it really should not be that should not be a factor in terms of getting people back to work. And I guess that's only been a month, so it remains to be seen whether we see a positive impact on that. But Eric, as I said, if you want to drop your personal contact information, we'll get back to you and let you know if there's anything more in the Build Back Better Act.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Appreciate you, Eric. We're going to move to Edward in just a moment here, but with about 15 minutes left in our forum here, I wanted to make a last call for emails for e-newsletter updates. If you'd like to get that email update from the Congresswoman's office, this will be your last opportunity during this forum to press 7, give us your email address, and get added to that email update list. You can also, of course, go to wild.house.gov to sign up for the e-newsletter, or again, just press 7 right here. Edward, thanks for joining us. Thanks for waiting. You're live.
Yeah, this is Ed from Easton. I got a question. Why didn't they evacuate the civilians in Afghanistan first before they send the military home first? And my second question is, if they're going to mandate all these vaccines to major corporations, all they're doing is losing people from working because they're making them mandatory, and a lot of these people ain't getting it. And you see what's going on in the hospitals in New York where nurses ain't getting vaccines. Now they don't have enough staff to supply these hospitals.
So 2 completely different questions, Ed. Happy to answer them. I was a critic myself of why the order of things that happened in Afghanistan. I didn't understand why we closed the air base, although keep in mind the air base was a considerable distance from the Kabul airport, but I didn't understand why we closed that air base before we had our evacuation plan completely in place. We've got these Afghan allies who worked alongside our troops for years, literally saved the lives of many of our troops and they are still there, and that causes me tremendous concern. And I can't answer the question of why, because it's one of the big questions I have. Earlier today, I was actually on a committee hearing where we were questioning the administration and past administration officials about Afghanistan and all of these questions. And all I can tell you is that we are going to continue to exercise our congressional oversight responsibilities to get to the bottom of all of this. It's a tremendous concern for me. I'm happy to report that the vast majority of Americans have gotten out. There are still some Americans who are either married to an Afghan or have other reasons for staying in Afghanistan who may not be out yet, but the vast majority of Americans are out. I'm just very concerned about these Afghan allies who work so closely with our troops who may be at substantial risk at the hands of the Taliban or ISIS. And the second part of your question having to do with vaccination mandates, I have to tell you, Edward, we've been in a public health crisis now for close on 2 years. And no, I don't think anybody wanted to have to go to vaccination mandates. I think the general sentiment was that once we finally got vaccines, that people should be sensible enough to go get themselves vaccinated so that we could get back to some normal way of living. What we saw is a resistance, so first a hesitancy. Some people overcame their hesitancy about getting vaccinated, but also a lot of people just decided that they didn't want to be vaccinated. And I think that ultimately these employers, by the way, we're talking by and large about private employers, although the president has also imposed this on federal government employees, have made the decision that they want to get back to normal and they're going to impose vaccination mandates. And by the way, you mentioned the hospitals. When you're in the business of providing health care and you've got vaccines, not one, but multiple vaccines that have been shown to be incredibly effective. I myself have received 2 vaccination shots plus the booster. Obviously, I'm a big believer. I find it to be somewhat relieving to have had that done. But the vast majority of employees have been okay with being vaccinated. It's a small minority that you're talking about who are not willing to be vaccinated. And quite honestly, that's a matter between them and their employer. If somebody chooses not to be vaccinated and their employer has mandated that they be vaccinated, then that's a private business decision that, quite honestly, they've made that decision. That's their personal, they have that right to make that decision. And they can, seek employment elsewhere. But I think that the problem of having not enough employees has very little to do with vaccination mandates. In fact, if anything, I think a number of people feel much safer in the workplace with a vaccination mandate in place.
Thank you again. Appreciate that answer. And thank you to Edward for being on our forum here. We've got about 12 minutes left. Let's get our next one up right away from, Gary in Northampton. You're live. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Congresswoman Weil. My concern is the southern border. You just mentioned that because of this pandemic, we had travel restrictions, yet this southern border has been opened up. President Trump had it somewhat under control. Why would this administration open up the border and allow all these illegal immigrants to come over? And don't tell me it's a humanitarian thing.
Well, I think your first name is Gary. I didn't hear it, Ian, exactly.
Gary.
But okay, thank you for the question. Obviously, the southern border is a huge concern. I'm going to push back just a little bit and say that there are some humanitarian issues. I don't think that anybody goes and to a border far, far away that they can only access after days and days of walking, unless there is a real risk to them in their home country. But having said that, this has been an ongoing crisis for the United States for a very long time. It's something that, quite honestly, we need a comprehensive plan. It needs to be a bipartisan plan. It needs a lot of sensible people in the same room talking about how we are going to bring about the end to this southern border crisis without politics being involved. Right now, what we've got is a bunch of politicians hurling insults at each other about the southern border, and that's not really helping us much at all. I will be very honest with you and tell you I'm a little bit disappointed. I know that the president assigned responsibility for the border crisis to the vice president. I'm a little disappointed. I haven't seen much in the way of results. I do think it's a very challenging problem. It's not one that I would necessarily want to be assigned to sort out. But I do believe that ultimately we've got to get to the root causes of why people are showing up at our southern border, expecting entry, in many cases being deported. In the case of the Haitians, you've seen that the president has entered orders for massive deportations right back to Haiti, which has been heavily criticized by members of his own party. But I don't think he had any choice but to do that. And, I would beg to differ with you that President Trump had it under control. I think this has been an ongoing problem for many years now. In fact, one of my big concerns with President Trump is that we had this problem of family separation, which I think is unconscionable, and that we can't let that happen. But at the same time, we've got to figure out, how do we stop people from coming to our southern border thinking or expecting entry when they're not going to get entry. We've got to provide more resources at the border. We've got to make sure that the right types of processes are being employed. And that doesn't just mean humans. It means car scanners. It means the Coast Guard getting a lot of support for the work that they do to make sure that illegal drugs aren't being brought into this country by criminals. But, it's a huge issue that would really, we would do well to depoliticize it and stop criticizing each other and figuring out how we're going to solve this problem. I don't have any easy answers. I will tell you that right now. If a whole, when thousands of people show up at the southern border, the question becomes, what exactly do you do with them? And I don't think the answer is to admit them into the country wholesale by any means. I don't think the answer is to imprison them in some sort of detention facility. So the question, in many cases, they get deported right back to where they came from, but that's often tragic. And, it's easy for us to close our eyes and not really think about it because we're not living it. But it is something if you care about people, and I'm sure everybody here on this call does. It's tragic to think about when you hear these stories of people who literally are dropping toddlers over a fence at the southern border. You have to be really desperate to do something like that. And so I guess I would just differ with you a little bit, Gary, on it being a humanitarian issue. I think we really need to think about the humanity of it, but we also have to solve the problem, and we need to do it in a much more rational way than we have been.
Appreciate the answer once again. Thanks so much. And let's get a couple more questions in here. We've got about 7 minutes left, and we're going to Miss Phoebe in Allentown next. Miss Phoebe, thank you for joining. Go ahead.
Oh, good evening. Congresswoman Susan, I just wanted to give you a shout out. Everybody always tells you all the things that are going wrong, and I'm one of those people who, if I have a concern, I'm going to say it loud and proud. Well, this time I have a shout out to you. You have giving PA7 ESSER funds that are greatly needed, especially here in Allentown when we have schools who are almost 150 years old. A COVID hit. We had no way whatsoever of updating the HVAC systems, of making sure that, we can make sure the germs don't go everywhere. And we've been able to get ionized systems with that and just make it so it's better. And because of that, Allentown has not had the problems that other school districts have had. We've really taken that money and made sure that we are using it for the facilities. So that I want to thank you for that, because that came from you because you're on the education committee. So thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. And another thank you is for the Freedom School. Okay, go ahead.
Well, if this is the Miss Phoebe, I think it is. You're on the Allentown.
Yes, it is.
So you're certainly in a position to know. And I think what you're referring to is back when COVID first hit. I fought really hard to make sure that we got $10 million to come back to the Allentown School District. And by the way, a lot of money to come back to our other school districts, because all of a sudden these schools, which are chronically underfunded, had to deal with a whole new way of learning, and unfortunately had students who were from homes that didn't have broadband internet, probably didn't have laptops. And the then school superintendent in Allentown told me that he literally did backflips when he heard about the federal funding, because it meant that he was able to get his students online and into this remote learning that was so unfortunate but absolutely essential during COVID. And by the way, even with that, the Allentown School District, as I understand it, Phoebe, was about 2 weeks behind the suburban school districts in terms of getting their students online and learning. And that's a lot. 2 weeks is a long time in a student's life.
It was more like a month. It was more like a month for one-to-one. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for the shout out. I appreciate it, but that's exactly the kind of thing that I feel really strongly about doing. Listen, we all pay taxes. None of us like paying taxes, but if we're going to pay taxes, I want to make sure that as much of it as possible is coming right back here to Pennsylvania 7. Thanks, Phoebe.
Thank you. Appreciate you, Congresswoman. Thank you again, Phoebe. Joy to have you on the call. And let's go to time for one, maybe two more questions. Then, folks, I'll remind you that we'll send you to voicemail if you need any further assistance or if we don't get a chance to answer your question. Congresswoman, this one comes from Connie in Allentown, who's asking, she's asked me to read it. The upcoming debt ceiling, if they don't raise it like they did for the past president, all monies will stop. I rely on Social Security since I lost my husband. I find it ridiculous that senators and congressmen always get their money, but the public doesn't get theirs if the debt ceiling is reached. I'm very concerned about this. And Congresswoman, that was from Connie in Allentown.
Connie, thank you. And you're right to be concerned about it. I do believe we're ultimately going to get this done because I am hoping that responsible members of the Senate in particular, because it's already passed through the House, are going to recognize that holding up that debt ceiling is going to be to the devastation of the American people. There are although my understanding is that Senator McConnell, who is the minority leader in the Senate, is encouraging all of his members not to vote for increasing the debt ceiling. I can't believe that somebody like Mitt Romney and some of the other senators who I consider to be very responsible members are going to vote against it. You've hit the nail on the head, Connie. It is going to be devastating if that debt ceiling is not raised. Again, just for anybody who didn't hear me before, we're not talking about it raising a debt ceiling so we can incur new debt. This is literally a matter of paying off the debts that have been incurred over the last 4 to 5 years. And it's vital that we do so. We're going to throw all of the global economic markets into a frenzy, but more particularly here at home, you are going to see an immediate impact on your interest rates, on your mortgage payments, on the money that is in your retirement plan. Employers are going to see a devastating effect and possibly have to implement layoffs, God forbid. So this is something that has to get done, and I'm just hoping and praying that the Senate is going to act responsibly on this.
All right. Thank you again, Congresswoman. And we are just about out of time in our hour here, so I apologize for not being able to get to more of your questions, folks, but we are going to wrap up here, and I'm going to close out in a moment after we hear any closing thoughts from the Congresswoman. If you need additional assistance, stay on the line here. You'll automatically go to the voicemail system. You can leave a voicemail message with your name, your phone number, and whatever your question or concern or constituent need is. Again, just stay on the line to leave those voicemails. Make sure you leave some contact info if you need assistance. I'll read that district office phone number one more time. That's going to be 484-781-6000. And you can always go to wild.house.gov if you didn't get a chance to sign up for the e-newsletter or you need any more information on the work the Congresswoman is doing. Again, that's wild.house.gov. And I'll mention, too, we had Eric in Lehigh County who was asking about assistance for restaurants. We've got your contact information, and the Congresswoman's office will be reaching back out to you. And, again, anybody else who needs assistance, be sure to stay on and leave a message. Representative Wild, I'll turn it back over to you to take us to the close here.
Thank you so much, Ian. And the last thing I'm just going to say is thank you to all of you. This is truly how a democracy operates. You get the opportunity to speak out, speak up, express your concerns to your elected representative.